The green room of the Davenant had a manner of pretending to be something else. By daylight, under the honest regard of the house cleaners, it was the green room of any well-worn London theatre. Faded silk upon the walls, a French sofa with one frail leg discreetly shored up by a bit of wood, the obligatory portrait of an undraped actress by some Regency hand, a smell that was not precisely dust and not precisely scent, but an accumulation of powders, wilting posies, and the long-dead perfumes of tempers. By evening and by design, it became, according to the wishes of its present master, an annex to his public charm. Lamps softened, reflective darkened bottles, chill silver under linen, and the suggestion, by no means accidental, that those admitted to this room were both honored and observed. Inspector Roderick Alleyn, a tall man moving with his habitual unhurried economy among the scatter of little chairs, watched the entrance as one might watch a stage, without seeming to. He had been brought by the simple device of an invitation that presupposed friendship into this world by a personality who, in Alleyn's plot of things, had long amused him. Sir Nicholas Davenant of the Davenant Theatre, sometime airman, now impresario, and tomorrow, if all went as program, bridegroom. "Rory, my dear man," Sir Nicholas had said, contriving to isolate him with a sweep of one shoulder that collected a duchess and released a critic. "You know everybody. You don't know anybody. That is the paradox of London. Forgive me. I must be utterly promiscuous for the next half hour. Harcourt will feed you." Miss Harcourt, Emmeline, was in position even as he said it, looking as if she had taken up the stance first thing in the morning and had not since altered it. She had a face that had taught itself how to be plain and serviceable, and eyes that had not learned the lesson. She produced not food as Sir Nicholas had promised, but a spray of gardenia that she pinned in her employer's buttonhole with the neatest of gestures. As she did so, Alleyn saw, because he saw such things as rhythm rather than as accident, her fingers pause, then correct a misalignment. A moment earlier she had flicked an invisible mote from the lapel. She neither looked at the woman for whom the flower was presumably meant to signify fidelity, nor at the man to whom it had, by convention, attached itself. She looked past them both. "Mr. Alleyn," she said, and there was a dryness at the edges of her tone as of paper not quite scorched. "Sir Nicholas is obliged to circulate. May I bring you champagne?" "You may be so good," Alleyn murmured, "though I should add that the superintendent of my department disapproves of green rooms and champagne in equal measure." "Then you must drink to his absence," she said with the hint of a smile, "and the theatre's temporary immunity." She moved away. Sir Nicholas, at the far end, was presenting the bride. It was done without that dramatic hush which lesser men will summon. He simply turned, and for a moment the room adjusted itself about him and the young woman leaning slightly on the back of a chair, Miss Lucilla Mansfield. One has known, Alleyn thought, brides who could be described by their materials: tulle and innocence, orchids and audacity. Miss Mansfield wore the well-cut simplicity of old money and new anxiety. She had a slender neck and eyes that were without secrets only in the sense that she had given nothing yet away. Her dress was the color of cream in winter light. In the angle made by her arm in the chair back appeared a glove, one glove only, rolled down neatly like a little discipline. When she smiled, she did not look towards the older woman standing not 2 feet from her, Dame Portia Vale, but over her shoulder to where a young man with the unexpended energy of rehearsal still about him had stationed himself on a music stool and made, with one wrist, a diligent decoration of the ivories. It was a scrap of a Schumann. How many scraps of Schumann had been used to accompany how many small moments of deflection in rooms like this one? Dame Portia was very handsome, in the proper and traditional mode, a profile that was almost Roman, hair designed for a stage in the stalls, a mouth with that trick cultivated by famous women of seeming to contain more irony than was reasonable. She was talking to General Peregrine Mansfield, who had inherited Lucilla with the calm exactitude with which he had accepted certain staff appointments. His mustache was of the kind that exists to be listened to. He wore his dress coat as if one more campaign called from the other side of the supper table. "Davenant's a showman," he said, for the benefit of Dame Portia's ear, but not exclusively. "He cannot help it. I suppose it is the nature of the thing. But I should vastly prefer, less of the stage in this marriage." "Then you should have advised your ward to fall in love with a solicitor," Dame Portia returned, not unkindly. "Only they these days keep their drama tidily folded until the bill of costs. Besides, she would have been miserable. Romance is in the devil's handwriting until it has been properly negotiated," the general observed. "You may quote me." "I shall," said Dame Portia, gently, and her look drifted, not to Sir Nicholas, but to Miss Harcourt, who was raising on their teetering legs the champagne flutes. Alleyn received his with a slight inclination from Miss Harcourt, and took up his post by the mantel, which held, among other arrangements, a bowl of lilies that were emphatically white and had already, in that disloyal way of lilies, surrendered some of their pollen to the silk beneath them. There was an envelope, very narrow, half under the edge of the bowl. It had not been there a moment ago. He knew because he had been looking for nothing particular and had seen everything. A small man in frock-coat black, the front-of-house manager, Alleyn supposed, came to the mantelpiece, appeared to adjust the arrangement of programs in the fan-shaped rack beside the clock, and slid the envelope further beyond sight, with the indifferent dexterity of the practiced. He had the look, either learned or natural, of a man who will be discreet unto burial. "That's Bryce," said a voice almost at Alleyn's elbow, and he discovered that Nigel Bathgate's place, much as Nigel himself was elsewhere, had been taken by the young man at the piano, who had come across the room with the quickness of a dog recalled. "Julian Arcott. I don't play, in point of fact. Dame Portia teases me. So that was impudence as well as flattery. You are Inspector Alleyn, I don't mistake." "Not if Mr. Bryce told you so," Alleyn said, and Arcott laughed. "No, it's port-of-call gossip. We all like to talk about policemen in the theatre, you know. It's a moral insurance. Is this your first visit to the Davenant?" "It is," Alleyn admitted, "though I have seen its consequences from the outside." "Lord, yes," Arcott said, and his eyes, handsome and liable to complaint, went across to Sir Nicholas. "He collects consequences like some men collect plate. There will be a scene presently. He won't be able to prevent it. He'll make it a charming scene, mind you." "There are rehearsals for such things?" Alleyn asked. "Always. He practices the extempore almost as thoroughly as the script. Look, there. He's going to introduce Jessup to the general. Only Sir Nicholas would contrive to present a stage doorkeeper as if he were an honorary dean." It was done with the smoothest performance. Mr. Jessup came in as retired sergeant's major come in, quietly, with a kind of decency in his back. He was a thin man and carried his cap in his hands as if it were a small infant. Sir Nicholas placed him between the general and Dame Portia with the blandest courtesy. "General, this is Jessup, who has kept our door since before my time. The general loves cautionary tales, Jessup, and I've told him yours, that you once sent away a cabinet minister with a message that there was nobody called Sir Henry in this theatre, and that he should tell the gentleman who sent him to stop leading him astray." Jessup's mouth made a movement that just reached humor. "I did not know the cabinet, sir. I knew my stage," he said. His eyes slid past Sir Nicholas and, quite properly, saw Lucilla. He had the look, then, that very old servants can sometimes afford themselves. A look almost as intimate as a father's and thrice as carefully masked. "If Jessup had been with me in Italy," the general said, "we should have protected a great many doors." Dame Portia's eyes lingered for a fraction on the old man's hands. "He protects us from the admirers," she said. "He does not protect us from ourselves." "Ah," said Sir Nicholas lightly. There, no, consult your notes, Harcourt. Is it not time to protect us from toasting? The bride, the bride. He accomplished it very well. Lucilla said the little thing that was expected with both charm and deflection. She thanked the company for their welcome and the theatre for its generosity. She stood very still while Sir Nicholas kissed her hand, a matter that could be a trick, but maybe, Alleyn thought, was not. And when the noise had run out, she turned, with that unconscious movement of self-preservation, to the piano. Arcot, who had returned to his stool by a chain as lightweight and as inescapable, played, more impudence now, just the right little march to make laughter, and the general, whose laughter was an infrequent and soldierly business, allowed himself to display approval. "Nick," Dame Portia said quietly, when the room had broken again into its bits of talk, "you should have left Schumann in Leipzig. It is too intelligent for you." "I like to be thought stupid by my leading lady," Sir Nicholas returned. "It confirms her tradition." "Your leading lady," she said, "is retiring. She retires with more knowledge of you than might be thought convenient, and not enough malice to make it profitable. Take care what you do with both these statements." "Portia," he said, and even Alleyn's uncommitted ear could detect, in that single name, a patchwork of history. "I always take care. It is my professional burden." Miss Harcourt had come to stand, unobtrusively, near the door. It was the unobtrusive that made Alleyn turn, as if at a draught. In her left hand was the little tortoise-shell box that Sir Nicholas earlier had flicked open and shut twice with the idle quickness of habitual gesture. He had refused cigarettes all evening. Alleyn had noted, without assigning weight to it, that he had paused twice to take what he fancied were pastilles. "They are vile," Dame Portia had said, when she saw him do it. "Violet, Oris, something fit for your grandmother's underlinen." "I made a promise to Lucilla," Sir Nicholas had replied. "No smoke in the flat until she has become as hardened as you are." "Let her keep her lungs as well as her illusions," Dame Portia said, and Miss Harcourt had not looked up. Now Mr. Bryce was conferring sotto voce with Mr. Jessup. Their conversation had the air of the theatre in its practicing of normality, a quiet that told one that something was to be timed. The stage door, Alleyn guessed. 11 o'clock. He had been told that the Davenant had its ritual. At the half hour, the lamps at the back of the stage were lowered. At the hour, the door at the little passage was locked. The keys hung on the nail in the doorkeeper's cubby. Sir Nicholas liked routines as other men like correspondence. They gave the impression of system and permitted opportunity. "Nick," Lucilla said, in a voice that was not rich enough to cross the room but carried straight to him as if by arrangement. "You promised to take you home before midnight," Sir Nicholas supplied. "My dear, did I? Then it is to be done. Harcourt, my coat. Harcourt, the car." "The car is at the stage door, sir," Miss Harcourt said. "Parker has brought it into the mews." "Then we will go the back way to avoid the paps," Sir Nicholas said. "Portia, General, we are going to commit that most untheatrical of acts, escape." "Marry him by all means," Dame Portia said to Lucilla as she came forward. "Only remember to lock up the theatre when he is not in it." "I shall," Lucilla said, and her smile made one doubt the thing by the exact measure that it was charming. Alleyn put down his glass. Sir Nicholas, already shrugging into his coat, came by him with that impersonal friendliness of the popular man who has correctly placed his acquaintance. "Rory, will you forgive me? We have the law's blessing, if not its presence." "I am present enough," Alleyn said. "You are," Sir Nicholas returned. He touched the breast of his coat to settle the flower. "Jessup?" "Sir." 11, then." 11, Jessup said, and there was something in the way he said it that might have been a respectful echo of the routine, or might have been a small protest, a man's acknowledgement of a promise that would prove to have an edge. They went out. Sir Nicholas, Lucilla, Miss Harcourt behind them like a practicality. Through the inner door at the far end, where a strip of light fell from the passage that led to the stage, The three figures passed. Arcot, at the piano, played, without indulgence, a bar of Mendelssohn and shut the lid with a little clap. "Bless them," the general said, "and keep my ward from organs. I distrust church musicians." Dame Portia laughed with her throat. Mr. Bryce let out a breath that came as a ghost into the air and was gone. There was a small relaxation in the green room, as when a held chord resolves. Alleyn stood by the mantel and saw by accident that the clock there had lost 4 minutes. Bryce, in his neat way, went to correct it. His hand passed the bowl of lilies. A grain of pollen touched the skin between thumb and forefinger and left an intolerant smudge. "What's that?" the general asked, as if the small had intruded impolitely upon the large. "Nothing, sir," Mr. Bryce said, and wiped the stain away with his handkerchief. "It is nothing at all." Alleyn, whose professional life had been spent in considering the degrees to which nothing at all became something, watched the handkerchief return, folded to Mr. Bryce's pocket. He noted, only because one notes these things when one is alone in a room full of talk, that Miss Harcourt had not come back. The door in the little passage remained ajar. Through it one heard, muffled and ordinary, the cough of the mews. The car, turning, the mutter of a chauffeur's throat cleared, Jessop's voice saying a thing he always said, in exactly the same tone, at exactly this time. It was a question and an answer together, part of a routine as transparent as smoke and as difficult to hold. "Good night, Sir Nicholas." "Good night, Jessop. 11, then." 11. It was all correct and done. The clock on the mantel, now obedient, chimed the hour to a room well pleased with itself. Dame Portia bent with that deliberation belonging to a woman who has ceased to care about her back, and took a single lily from the bowl. She shook it clean, in a little white fall of dust. "For luck," she said, and the general, unsmiling, lifted his glass to nobody in particular. It was a social evening that proceeded according to its program. Nothing happened that could not have been predicted, and no one said anything for which they could have been nobly ashamed. That they were all faintly exhausted by their own good behavior was not their fault. It is hard to be pleasant in public. Alleyn, before he left, spoke to Jessop at the stage door cubby. The old man, restoring his keys to the nail with that studied indifference that is a servant's version of privacy, nodded. "You are a friend of Sir Nicholas," he said, without interrogation. "I'm invited to believe so," Alleyn answered. Jessop's eyes considered him and then, almost audibly, decided to keep something back. "If you are his friend," he said, "you will tell him when he asks you that the door was locked. I locked it after him. It is my job." "You make a habit of being asked such questions." "I don't make a habit of anything," Jessop said. "They make it for me." When Alleyn went out to the quiet of the night, light fog under the theatre lamps, an empty taxi idling at the corner like a cat, the muse already in repose, he put up the collar of his coat against the October chill and thought, with the weariness of a man who had seen so many little dances of civility, that the happiness of such people was always in the timing. It must be exact, or it failed. He had once said that love was a matter of good manners under stress. It was not a remark that had made him popular. He walked away down the street and, not looking back, nevertheless kept at the back of his mind the little vacant strip of light in the passage, the rolled glove on the chair, and the word that had been said thrice in the manner of an incantation. Mrs. Harrow closed the green room door upon the last departing guest and turned back with a composure that would have done credit to an actress of the old school. Dr. Vere stood by the mantel, his hands clasped behind him. Alleyn, who had not sat since the announcement of Mr. Blackwood's non-appearance, remained near the window, the shadows of the courtyard making a dark mirror of the glass. "You said there might be cause for concern," Alleyn prompted, gently. Dr. Vere inclined his head. "Adrian has lately been, how shall I put it, uneasy in himself. A restlessness with an overlay of calculation. Tonight's absence is unlike him in one particular. He minds appearances. He would not, I think, risk public discourtesy without a compelling reason. Mrs. Harrow's fan, a relic from her youth, made a soft sound as it moved. "We have had our share of temperaments, Inspector. Mr. Blackwood is not of that sort." Before Alleyn could reply, there was the discreet knock of an old servant at the limits of anxiety. Parsons presented himself, cap in hand, his voice hushed by the theatre's nocturnal acoustics. "Beg pardon, ma'am. Would you wish to see me a moment?" Mrs. Harrow's look invited confidence. Parsons glanced at Alleyn and Dr. Vere and seemed relieved to speak plainly. "Mr. Inkpen from the electrician's crew, him that's married to my niece, has just told me there's a motor car standing in the stage mews. Been there since twilight, he thinks. No one has owned to it. He thought as how you might wish to know." "A motor car," Mrs. Harrow repeated. "What sort of car?" "A black one, ma'am, new-looking, with flowers in it." At this last particular, which was peculiar enough to sharpen attention, Alleyn said, "If you please, Mrs. Harrow, perhaps we might take a look." They went by way of the passage that runs behind the dressing rooms where mirrors sleep by night and distend the lamplight into wavering pools. The theatre had settled into its post-performance hush, that faintly ecclesiastical quiet common to large empty spaces. The door to the stage mews opened upon the little yard where scenery is wheeled out and tradesmen confer. Damp had risen from the flagstones, and the air smelt of wet dust and extinguished lamps. The car stood near the archway, a modest, well-kept saloon with the number plates still bearing a film of country road upon them. Its presence there, so composed and ordinary, might have escaped notice if not for the little crescent of white roses upon the back seat, a florist's wreath bound with a ribbon of green. Alleyn moved to the driver's side and, after the shortest pause, habit, courtesy, opened the door. The interior held a mild chill and the faint sweetness of roses. On the rear seat, leaning as though the jolting of the day had persuaded him into a deeper doze, sat Adrian Blackwood. His hat had slipped against his shoulder. His head was turned a fraction away, the neat hairline dark against the paler skin. He wore evening clothes and a white rose in his buttonhole. There was nothing sensational, nothing disfiguring, only a stillness that excluded breath. Alleyn's hand, very lightly, touched the wrist. He did not look round when he spoke. "Dr. Vere." The doctor had already stepped in beside him, his movements quiet and free of fuss. He set his fingers where Alleyn's had been, then for a moment at the throat. He looked at the closed lids, the set of the mouth, the hand that had fallen palm up upon the cushion, and he let out a breath that did not alter the air. "He is dead," Dr. Vere said. "It is not quite recent." Mrs. Harrow did not cry out. Her fan, which she had brought with her without noticing, closed upon itself like a small bird at roost. "Oh," she said very softly, and steadied a hand against the doorframe. Parsons remained respectfully back, his eyes lowered, as if someone were on stage and he would not break the illusion by meeting their gaze. "Shall I fetch the police, sir?" he ventured, directing the question toward Alleyn as one acknowledges rank that is not theatrical. "Yes," Alleyn said. "The yard will be informed. Meanwhile, I must ask that nothing be touched and nobody told beyond those who must know." He met Mrs. Harrow's eyes. "For the sake of decency and of accuracy." "Of course," she said. Her voice recovered itself on the word. "We will keep the doors locked." Alleyn leaned in once more, not to disturb so much as to notice. The white rose at Adrian's lapel had a faint bruising at one petal, a smear of some transparent fluid like dew. On the floor by his shoe lay the ivory card case Alleyn had seen him carry on better nights. It had slid open, its contents a few calling cards and a note folded small. He did not take up the note. He observed it. Then he drew back, standing straight in the damp-smelling yard. "Mr. Parsons," he said, almost casually, "pray ask your night porter to see that no one comes this way." "Dr. Vere, may I ring from your office, Mrs. Harrow?" "Please do," she answered. "Inspector, Miss Carstairs—" "We will not send for her yet," Alleyn said. "There is time enough for sorrow, and there is work." Alleyn's first instructions were quietly practical. He asked Parsons to bring no one in and to let no one out but the police surgeon when he came. Mrs. Harrow, steadying herself with a breath, agreed to keep the company close, separate rooms if possible, and to say merely that Mr. Blackwood had been taken ill. She looked at Alleyn once, briefly, as if to say that this too was theatre, and she would play her part. Left in the small office with Dr. Vere, Alleyn stood for a moment, letting silence settle. The desk lamp cast a cone of light that flattened the room's few objects into a mild, still life. A fountain pen with a gold nib, a thick theatre ledger open upon penciled cue sheets, a blotter marbled with old ink, a glass carafe half full of water, a single tumbler, clean and dry. The office window was shut against the October damp. Its latch was firmly down. The door's key rested in the lock. He looked at Blackwood without touching him. The man's head lay to one side on his forearm as if he had turned for comfort and found it. The evening clothes were correct to the last stud. The white tie was uncreased. There was no sign of struggle. A faint fragrance lingered, sweet rather than pungent, curious in a workroom that usually smelt of dust and paper and, faintly, sighs from the scenery. "Did he suffer?" Alleyn asked, not as a policeman, but almost as a courtesy. "Not if appearances signify," Dr. Vere replied. "It was very quick. His pupils are—" He stopped himself, his professional reticence returning. "We must wait." Alleyn's gaze moved. On the desk's edge lay a white petal, slightly bruised at the tip. He noticed, too, on Blackwood's left cuff, a minute smudge the color of faded violet. Chalk, perhaps, or grease paint. Blackwood was not of the theatre. He made no note aloud. The ledger's page, under the man's hand, displayed a tidy column of rehearsal calls and a margin where a neat, untheatrical script had written the word "bouquet" beside tomorrow's matinee. He slid the blotter a fraction. A ghost of recent writing showed on its surface, reversed, scant and sharp, like a whisper, a capital A, perhaps, followed by a short word ending with an upstroke. He let it be. The tumbler was dry. The carafe showed no finger marks beyond a dull patina of use. On the floor, near the chair leg, a sliver of green tape lay curled, the kind that secures bouquets or bundles of programs. He filed that away with the petal. "May I—" Dr. Vere indicated the body. At Alleyn's nod, he felt carefully at the wrists, lifted an eyelid with a practiced hand. His face did not change, but there was a moment, a breath, when his composure cost him something. "I shall telephone for the police surgeon from the manager's office," he said. "Mr. Grimsby must be told," Alleyn murmured. "After we have asked him to keep the corridors clear. We have so few moments of quiet. They are precious." He stood alone a little longer. A small brass paperweight in the shape of a mask had been shifted from its usual circle of dust. There, perhaps, a hand not accustomed to this desk had fumbled. The chair opposite the dead man bore a filament of pale thread on its back, as though someone had brushed by. The view from the window was of the courtyard's faint lamps and the cobbles glistening with the day's residue of rain. Outside, the theater's stillness pressed upon the panes like a hand. When he left the office, he closed the door with care and stood for a moment in the corridor's dimness. The theater was hollow now. One heard small domestic sounds, the click of a switch, the soft pad of Parsons's shoes, a cough quickly subdued. He moved toward the green room. They were waiting, Mrs. Harrow by the mantelshelf, composed and pale, Mr. Grimsby with the peculiar tautness of men who contemplate disaster as a ledger entry, Miss Violet Ashford, too bright, hands carefully empty, Colonel Weatherby stiff with propriety, Mrs. Pemberton already prepared to be comforted, and Diana, not seated, but standing at the window, looking down into the courtyard as if the stones there might answer what people would not. Alleyn spoke very little. He said that Mr. Blackwood had been taken ill, that a doctor was in attendance, that no one should leave until he had taken their names and made the necessary arrangements with the authorities. He made it sound like a matter of routine out of politeness, as if he apologized for the intrusion of untidy reality into their evening. He watched the minute reactions, the fractional droop of Mr. Grimsby's shoulders, calculating refunds, no doubt, if the evening must be retold to donors. The brief glance that passed between Mrs. Harrow and Diana, the way Miss Ashford laced her fingers and then, remembering, let them fall to her sides. Colonel Weatherby's eyebrows climbed and settled. Parsons, in the doorway, stood with the gravity of an old soldier at a graveside. "Mr. Parsons," Alleyn said, "would you be so kind as to sit by the stage manager's corridor? Admit no one. Mrs. Harrow, perhaps you would keep your guests here, and Mr. Grimsby, your staff away from that passage." "You think?" Mrs. Harrow began, and then stopped. "I think we must be orderly," Alleyn said. He took up a position by the hearth, not dominating, simply present, and let the room live around him. People, under strain, reveal themselves in the economy of their movements, who reaches for a glass and then sets it down untouched, who remembers a shawl for another, who speaks only to be silent. He gathered these small economies and put them away like sovereigns in a purse. Presently, he would ask his questions. For now, he only looked and listened, and thought of a white petal on a workroom desk. Alleyn, with Mrs. Harrow's quiet authority behind him, established a small ante-room off the green room as an interview space. The theatre had resumed its peculiar after-hours hush. The stage lay dark, smelling faintly of dust and flowers. Somewhere, a solitary lamp burned before a gilt mirror, and a corridor door clicked softly in the draught. He asked for Miss Carstairs first. Diana entered with a composure that seemed self-willed rather than natural, her emerald gown now cloaked by a dark wrap. She sat without being asked, folded her gloves together, and met his eye with civil courage. "Miss Carstairs," said Alleyn, "this will be tiresome, but we must arrange the facts. You received flowers this afternoon." "At 4 precisely," she said. "White roses with ivy." Adrian was sentimental about punctuality. It amused him to disguise it as chivalry. "And a card?" "A conventional message," she replied too quickly. "Best wishes for the evening." Alleyn let the silence rest as one might place a paperweight on fluttering pages. Diana's gaze lowered to her gloves. "Forgive me," he said mildly. "The precise wording may prove material." She drew breath. "It was not effusive. 4 then. D." After a heartbeat, she added, "It is possible I am misremembering. I was hurried." "Quite." He regarded her hands. "You and Mr. Blackwood. No disagreements of late?" Her smile was lovely and quite hopeless. "Inspector, engagements are complicated affairs. One weighs one's life as if upon scales. If you ask whether we quarreled, I will say only that we had differing senses of theatre. Adrian admired the curtain more than the play." She rose, then thought better of it. "Do you suppose he—" Something halted the sentence at the edge of speech. "No. You will tell me when there is anything to tell." "I shall," he said, and stood for her. When the door closed behind her, he noted that her gloves carried a faint, powdery smear that was not dust, something with a bluish cast, more violet in a certain light. Miss Violet Ashford entered next with eager modesty. She sat very straight, her hat at an angle chosen to flatter ingenuousness, and watched him watching her. "This is terrible," she said. "Miss Carstairs bears it so bravely." "You saw her receive the flowers?" Alleyn asked. "I happened to be in her room. Mr. Parsons brought them, such a quantity one might drown in their fragrance." She made a small, delighted shiver. The card was unusual. How so? Not the florist's flimsy, a heavier stock. Plain. She examined her memory with conscientious brightness. I thought the hand looked masculine but unlabored. Oh, and the envelope was unsealed. I noticed because Miss Carstairs set it under her mirror at once. You are observant, Miss Ashford. Understudies must be. She allowed her smile to fade delicately. If Adrian was here, before, perhaps he wished to steady his nerves. Men are sometimes overcome when they get what they wanted. Did you see Mr. Blackwood at the theatre later? No, only someone passing the stage door at 4:30 with a hat pulled low, she said, almost as if repeating a line learned in rehearsal. I thought it might be Mr. Grimsby. He has a way of walking as if apologizing to a schedule. Mr. Percival Grimsby presented a different texture of evasion, the nervous correctness of a man habituated to timetables and creditors' notes. He arrived with a sheaf of papers, as if to establish his natural environment. The ledger Mr. Blackwood consulted, Alleyn said. Was theatre business? Our subscription list, Grimsby replied, smoothing the top sheet. Donors, settlements, billet due to our creditors. Mr. Blackwood had lately taken an interest. Pure patronage, a flicker in the eyes. He proposed, in principle, to underwrite a revival. In principle, he repeated. Who has keys to the stage manager's office? Myself, Miss Harrow, and, on occasion, our stage manager. The door should have been locked at 6. Yet it stood ajar. Grimsby's fingers fussed with his key ring. Then I must have erred, or someone borrowed and returned without my knowledge. The theatre is a sieve at certain hours. You saw Mr. Blackwood today? A glimpse, after 3 in the passage by the paint store. He seemed considering, as if shifting pieces on a board only he could see. Alleyn allowed him to retreat. The little anteroom, briefly warm with talk, cooled again. He stood a moment, hearing the theatre breathe, the flutter of a curtain, the faint knock of the building's old ribs. Patterns were assembling themselves. Punctual flowers, a card out of keeping with florists' habits, a private office open when it should not be, a man arranging his own evening as if it were a scene set to cues. He would speak next with Parsons and the charwoman who came at dusk with her pale and her quiet eyes. In such precincts, knowledge wore aprons and went by softly in sensible shoes. The humbler arteries of the meridian, the narrow stairways, the paint-scented passages, the little cupboards where lives were hung for a few hours on pegs, received Inspector Alleyn with a discretion that was almost courtly. He moved among them without hurry, as though to intrude brusquely would be to break a pact the place had made with itself long ago. Parsons stood at his post by the stage door, hands folded, gaze front. In daylight, his face showed the fine parchment of age and the stubborn honor of long service. Mr. Parsons, Alleyn said, almost as if they discussed a matinee schedule. You spoke last night of a caller, 4:30. Yes, sir, a gentleman, not one of ours. After a pause, he added, knew his way enough to keep from being noticed. A contradiction. Yes, sir, Parsons agreed gravely. He had a look of knowing and not wanting to be known. Kept his hat down. He spoke with Mr. Blackwood out back. I didn't hear words. Length of the visit? 10 minutes, sir. Mr. Blackwood went back in rather brisk and didn't see me. He was wearing a white bloom then. Parsons' eyes shifted, almost apologetically. Many of 'em wear a flower, sir, for effect. A white bloom, Alleyn repeated. And later, Parsons fussed, as if aligning invisible papers. I couldn't say, sir. He could say, Alleyn thought. He only would not. Loyal reticence, the old compact between servants and the households they serve, extended here to a theatre's peculiar family. Alleyn thanked him and let the silence sit a moment, as one might warm a chair before taking it. It is a comfort, he added, to have a man at the door who notices the right things. Parsons inclined his head. Thank you, sir. In the wardrobe room, where the air held the faintest ghosts of damp wool and rice powder, Mrs. Gannett presided with the maternal severity found in those who keep glitter looking respectable. Her pin cushion rode her wrist like a cuff. "Miss Carstairs' dresser is at home, Inspector," she informed him. "I can answer for what's proper." "I'm sure you can," said Alleyn. "About the flowers, perhaps? They were to be delivered at 4. Mrs. Gannett's eyes, a mild blue, did not shift, but her hand made a neat little correction to a seam already straight. Time was kept. A standing glass vase in the star dressing room. White roses, sprigs of ivy. There was a note. "For Miss Carstairs?" "For her, sir. I put it under the mirror lamp to be seen. The young lady read it, tore it once through, and put it in the drawer. Later it was not there." "Not there?" "No, sir." Mrs. Gannett threaded a new needle. "We tidy before evening calls. We do not throw away what is not ours." "Quite." Alleyn glanced at the work table. "Did Mr. Blackwood come to the dressing room?" "Twice," she said after a moment. "Once early to see the flowers. Once later, before 7, when Miss Carstairs had gone to the green room. He stood a minute and went away again." "With the bloom?" Mrs. Gannett's needle paused. "He put a flower in his buttonhole, yes. I remarked he had clever fingers at a stem, which is not usual in a gentleman. The tape was left on the table. I threw it away. Green florist's tape. If there's green tape, there's no need for anyone to see it, Inspector. It looks untidy." "So it does," Alleyn agreed. On his way out, he met Ivy, the theater maid, leaving with her basket and her brave little hat. She bobbed, ready to flee. "Miss Ivy, you were on in the stage manager's corridor yesterday." "Oh, only a bit, sir. Just to dust in the afternoon, because Mr. Grimsby says the police notice things what ordinary people never do. Begging your pardon?" "They notice beautiful things," Alleyn said gravely. "Like dusting. Did you see Mr. Blackwood there?" Her eyes widened. "Yes, sir. He went into the office after he'd looked in at the fridge in the little pantry. Please, sir, not to say anything to Mr. Grimsby. We're not to use that fridge for private purposes." "Did he take anything?" "I don't know, sir," she said with the exactness of the scrupulous poor. "I only know he looked." "And later?" "I went back with the evening tray. There was a smell, sir. Nice at first, like marzipan, and then not. I opened the window a crack." Alleyn let her go, for she had reached the end of courage. He stood a while in the little passage where, beyond a thin wall, a life had ceased with almost indecent quiet. The day had sharpened, the pale sun falling in a deliberate stripe across scuffed linoleum, picking out a single white petal that had come to rest against the skirting board. A theatre, Alleyn reflected, was a machine of habits. Vases filled at 4, notes put under lamps, trays set down at the turn of the hour, doors opened and then shut again. Somewhere in these gentle, unremarkable mechanics, a hand had moved out of time. He turned, back toward the green room, already hearing in memory the steady tick of routine. If there was a key to Adrian Blackwood's death, it would lie not in drama, but in something done so properly it would be almost invisible. Alleyn returned to the stage-door lodge with the unobtrusive purposefulness that soothed nervous witnesses and unsettled careless liars. Parsons, who held routine as sacrosanct, received him like a fellow parishioner consulting an old church register. "The visitor's book, if you please," Alleyn said. Parsons produced a ledger whose green baize cover had worn thin where hands had habitually rested. The entries were neat, governed by a consistent hand when Parsons himself filled in time and purpose, and modified by the various scrawls of actors, electricians, and occasional grandees. Alleyn traced the column for the previous afternoon. At 3:05, Mr. Adrian Blackwood appeared in a firm, well-schooled script. At 4:30 there was no entry, though Parsons had described a gentleman's visit. "You did not record the caller you saw at 4:30?" Alleyn asked without censure. Parsons stiffened. "I did not, sir. The gentleman did not come through here. He approached from the alley and signaled Mr. Blackwood through the side door. That door is for scenery, not company, but Mr. Blackwood was insistent. I was about to intervene when he made me a sign not to trouble myself." "Unusual," Alleyn murmured. In a house where custom governed movement, a breach of the stage door ritual was as revealing as a shouted confession. He closed the ledger gently. "There is also the matter of Mr. Blackwood's signature," he added, leafing back 2 months to find earlier entries. The hand, measured, elegant, with an idiosyncratic downward flick to the final D, was consistent. He recalled the card Mrs. Whitmore had described. "All accounts will be settled by evening," signed with his initials. The notation might be recalled imperfectly, yet Alleyn had the distinct sense that the blazoned certainty of A.B. would have shown that same downward flick. It was a small thing, but small things in the right places had undone murderers before. "May I see the pantry?" he asked. The pantry sat off the corridor, a square, practical space with a marble slab, a small refrigeration unit humming dutifully, and shelves that wore their labels like badges. Trays, glasses, flowers, "Do not drink." Ivy, summoned by Parsons' bell pull, bobbed an anxious curtsy and retreated to the threshold. "This is where you prepare the evening water?" Alleyn asked. "Yes, sir. I set a carafe and 1 glass for each office in use. Always 1 glass, sir, except for the green room." "Inverted?" "Oh, yes, sir. Inverted after polishing to show it's clean. Mr. Grimsby doesn't like dust inside his glasses." Alleyn glanced at the shelf. Inverted glasses stood in patient rows. In the stage manager's office last night, the glass had been upright and dry. Ivy, by habit, would have left it inverted. Someone had corrected the tableau to suggest recent use while ensuring there had been none. It was a trifle, explained only by the tyranny of routine. He examined the jug marked "Flowers, do not drink." A sprig of damp green clung to its lip. Lifting it to his face, he detected the faintest ghost of that sweet, pernicious scent. A cloth lay folded beside it, too carefully laundered, with a telltale bruise of purple at one corner. "Who trims the stems?" he asked. "I do, sir, unless Mrs. Whitmore does it for Miss Carstairs. We use that jug to stand them in until they go to the dressing rooms. Mr. Blackwood brought his own buttonhole yesterday and clipped it here. He was very particular." "The violet stain?" Alleyn turned the cloth. Ivy blushed at see. "It came from the rubber stamp, sir. The admitted stamp we use on rehearsal slips. It spills sometimes when Mr. Grimsby hurries." Alleyn set down the jug. Green florist's tape in a curl beneath Blackwood's chair, a white petal bruised on the ledger, a violet smudge on the cuff. The pantry's jug, the inverted glasses, the missing entry in the book, each only a mote. Together they settled into a pattern like dust on a polished mantelpiece, visible if one stood at the right angle. He thanked Ivy and returned along the corridor, pausing at the side door. The bolt had been drawn and reset. He bent, considering the scuff marks on the stone. A man had waited here, throwing the theatre's ritual out of balance for 10 brief minutes, enough to reach Blackwood before the evening's appointed festivities. The house had accepted the intrusion with its usual discretion. Only its habits had protested. When he rejoined Mrs. Harrow in the green room, she was directing the removal of last night's roses with a composed solicitude that did her credit. "Inspector," she asked. "A small question of housekeeping," he said lightly. "I should be grateful to see Mr. Blackwood's rooms, if they can be reached without disturbing Miss Carstairs." Mrs. Harrow's pause was fractional. "His chambers are at Albemarle Street, and the address is with Parsons. I will have a car sent." Alleyn inclined his head. If the theatre's rituals had been subtly broken, perhaps those of an orderly bachelor's rooms would show a similar hairline crack. He did not hurry. The day had acquired the measured tempo of a dress rehearsal in which every cue fell where it must, and some, unexpectedly, did not. Alleyn returned to the theatre in the pale portion of afternoon when the house felt more like a convent than a place of entertainment. Sounds were softened, doors closed gently, and the very dust seemed to settle in consideration of custom. It was the hour when routine performed itself almost without human intervention, and therefore the hour Alleyn liked best for noticing the smallest of trespasses. Mrs. Whitmore, summoned with a calm word through Parsons, received him in the wardrobe room among rails of costumes and the faint odor of starch and powder. On a narrow table lay the quiet impedimenta of her trade, a pin cushion shaped like a tomato, a spool of green florist's tape, wire cutters, and a row of slim glass tubes, each no longer than a finger and stoppered with cork, water picks for boutonnieres. "We salvage flowers as a rule," she explained, matter-of-fact and faintly defensive. "Cast-off blooms go into the small vases in the corridor, or I make a few boutonnieres for visiting gentlemen. It is expected, sir, and saves expense." Alleyn picked up one of the glass tubes, turned it to the light, and noted a hairline crack feathering from the rim. Another bore a faint cloudy bloom as if something had reacted with the water. He raised it to his nose and caught the ghost of an odor, sweet at first, then curiously draining into something disagreeable. "You rinse these where?" "In the pantry sink off the prompt corner. Ivy does it of an evening unless I have time." Ivy, produced like a shy prop by Mrs. Whitmore's call, bobbed and folded her fingers into her apron. "I rinsed them last night, sir. 2 were sticky. Not like sap, more like a syrup that went away quick in hot water. There was that same smell. I thought it was the almond essence we sometimes dab on the handkerchiefs when the ladies like a touch." "Show me the essence," Alleyn said. In the pantry, the shelves were arranged with the decency of an old-fashioned larder. Labeled jars, a teapot with its lid tied to the handle, a rack of glasses. Ivy reached for a brown bottle with a scuffed paper label. Almond. The cork was tight. He noted without comment that the glue along the label's edge was new. He unstopped it, inhaled lightly, and replaced the cork at once. "Leave that as it is," he said. "And tell me, what is the usual business of these tubes?" Mrs. Whitmore, restored to authority, demonstrated with a calm hand, a white rosebud drawn from a basin, its stem trimmed and slipped into the glass pick. The cork fitted neatly, the join bound with green tape. "No water marks the gentleman's coat," she said almost with pride. A small kindness. Alleyn's glance moved to the basin. Petals drifted like scraps of paper on a municipal pond. At the bottom, the stems were neatly recut, each cut as precise as a schoolboy's exercise. He took up one, turned it to examine the cut edge, and noticed a faint bruising at the calyx on 2 buds, not present on the others. He set them aside. "White roses are not Miss Carstairs' habit," he said without any particular intonation. "Not at all," Mrs. Whitmore replied after a tiny pause. "She favors color. The white came from yesterday's bouquet, the one she asked me to dispose of. I stripped them, as I always do. It feels wasteful to throw away good blooms." "And you prepared boutonnieres?" "A few, sir. I put 2 in the small vase by the stage door, as is custom. Parsons likes to offer a gentleman something decent if he calls." Parsons, fetched and grave, recalled without strain. "I set one aside on the tray, sir. A gentleman, Mr. Blackwood, returned through the stage door a little before 5. He took a bloom from the vase, thanked me, and went along to the little office." Alleyn allowed the sequence to arrange itself in silence. White roses sent and rejected. Stems stripped for salvage in obedience to the quiet economy of theaters. Water picks rinsed in the pantry. A boutonniere waiting in the small vase as it always waited. A gentleman pausing, as gentlemen will, to pin on the token that declares occasion. He returned to the office where Blackwood had been found. The white petal he had noticed still lay, bruised, near the ledger. He opened the desk drawer and found at the back a second coil of green tape. Not the tidy spool from Mrs. Whitmore's table, but a short, pocketed length with its edge darkened by use. He laid it beside the petal without touching either further. Presently, Dr. Pembroke joined him, carrying the softness professionals wear for rooms that have hosted death. "You've the look of a man who has found the ordinary," the surgeon murmured. "Become instructive." "The ordinary is industrious," Alleyn said, "and it has its tools. A test or two will oblige you." Dr. Pembroke lifted one of the glass picks with a forceps, his nose wrinkling the slightest degree. "If I'm right, we shall have an answer not of mechanics, but of access." Alleyn's gaze rested a moment on the dark proscenium where the stage lay waiting, blank and impartial, for tonight's rehearsal call. In a house where every small kindness had its ritual, one ritual had been turned a degree to the left. Parsons, discreet in the doorway, coughed his apology. "A note for you, sir," he said, "delivered by hand. No return address." He hesitated. It was left upon the stage door tray, under the vase. By late afternoon the theatre had resumed its outward routine, though everything moved with the hush that follows a matinee performed to half-empty seats. Inspector Alleyn, who had learned to distrust surfaces, found the meridian's returning rhythms faintly contrived, like an understudy playing normalcy with conscientious care. He was at the anteroom desk, assembling notes with the absent-minded neatness of habit, when a thin envelope slid almost noiselessly beneath the door. He waited a measured moment before stooping. The paper was good quality, a pale cream with a watermark that revealed itself against the light. Meridian Theatre, Green Room Stationery. Inside lay a single card, cut square from a larger sheet, the edges too precise to be careless. The message, in the same careful violet ink, read, "The gentleman discharged his obligations. Do not distress the lady. A friend of the theatre." Alleyn stood, letting the card balance on his fingertips, as if its weight might betray more than its words. The hand was the same disguised script as on the card Parsons had produced, and the choice of paper had a galling neatness. House stock, impersonally intimate. The implication seemed obvious and therefore suspect. He placed it in an envelope and sealed it without comment. He sent for Parsons. "Our post box?" "Emptied as usual at 3, sir," the doorkeeper replied. "No new delivery since." "That slipped in from inside?" "Quite." Alleyn's gaze drifted, not idly, to the corridor. Someone had wished to guide his attention and to limit it in the same breath. The theatre, obliging conspirator, had provided convenient materials. He asked then, quietly, to see the pantry again. Mrs. Whitmore met him at the threshold with the grim patience of a woman whose province had been disturbed twice in one day. The shelves seemed as before. Yet the small brown bottle marked almond sat now perfectly aligned, its label unruffled. The glue fresh, but different. He turned it gently, studying the texture of the paper with detached curiosity. "Was this moved?" he asked. Mrs. Whitmore's answer came after a pause that was not quite hesitation. "Not by me, Inspector. I found it set straight when I came down after dinner, and the little glass measure washed and drying. I had left it upside down." "Who has access here?" "Everyone, when no one is looking," she said dryly. "But chiefly myself, Ivy, the property man, and Mr. Grimsby when he remembers where the biscuits are kept." "Mr. Grimsby," Alleyn repeated, as if merely completing her list. "He did not attend this afternoon's rehearsal," she added. "Not his habit. He sent word of a headache." Alleyn thanked her and remained after she withdrew, absorbing the small, officious silence of the pantry. Someone had tidied a detail that had seemed askew. Not removed it, not hidden it, only returned it to the appearance of order. That last, he reflected, was often the louder noise. When he came back to the stage, Diana Carstairs was crossing under the work lights with a deliberate economy that had little to do with acting. She paused when she saw him and, after the fraction of a moment during which she arranged her face, approached with courtesy. "Inspector," she said, "I've been asked to go on with tomorrow's performance. It appears the public requires its scheduled dreams." "I rarely quarrel with well-kept timetables," Alleyn returned. "Do you feel equal to it?" She looked toward the wings, where a scrap of gauze hung like an abandoned cloud. "One does what one must. Is there any news?" "Only the sort that makes one careful," he said lightly, not to punish her with more than she could bear. A note was left, anonymous and solicitous. "Solicitous of me?" Her tone was flat enough to pass for amusement. "Of the lady," he said. "You have many friends in the theatre." She let that pass. "Inspector, I should like my dressing-room key returned as soon as is proper. There are personal letters within. I would prefer they be read by no one." "We will be respectful," he said, with a gravity that was not feigned. As she moved away, Miss Violet Ashford emerged from the opposite wing, pale and bright-eyed, a hand to her throat. She halted when she saw Alleyn, then took 2 measured breaths that were as much calculation as composure. "Mr. Grimsby is not here," she said in a voice pitched for confidence. "No one knows where he is. The accounts cabinet in his office is locked, and the little ledger he carries in his pocket is missing." "Is that unusual?" "Unprecedented," she replied, with a small flare of satisfaction instantly checked. "He guards that ledger as a miser guards his lamp." Alleyn inclined his head. "Thank you." When she had gone, he remained very still, sensing in the returning quiet a new pattern settling, 2 small shifts designed, perhaps, to appear unconnected. A bottle straightened, a note directed, a manager indisposed, a ledger vanished. Not a crash, then, but a settling. A theatre adjusting to a changed center of gravity. It was the kind of movement one hears only if listening for it. Alleyn, who made a profession of listening, heard it now and allowed it to rest, like dust where it chose to fall. The shape it traced would be clearer after it had lain undisturbed. Alleyn remained in the green room after the small conference dispersed, letting the theatre's subdued machinery murmur about him. He had learned long ago that certain puzzles do not yield to force. They unlace themselves if one sits very still and attends to their breathing. He arranged his thoughts as a stage manager might arrange call sheets. First, the boutonnière, white, salvaged from a rejected bouquet, prepared according to custom, and, by small deviation, transformed into an instrument. Second, the language, settling accounts, debts paid, final curtain, phrases repeated with the insistence of a leitmotif. Third, the ink, violet, cheap in its prettiness, yet used with deliberate theatricality. Fourth, the pantry, an ordinary bottle labeled almond, now discreetly vanished, and a shelf wiped to an anxious shine. Lastly, time, the unseen but implacable prompter. If cyanide, then access. If access, then either confidence or invisibility. The theatre offered both. Mrs. Whitmore knew the water picks, their cleaning, their storage, their little cracked edges. Ivy knew where bottles sat and when they shifted. Parsons knew the rhythms of doors and messages. Mr. Grimsby had keys and an administrator's plausible reason to be anywhere. Miss Ashford possessed the small, sharp knowledge of understudies, where spare flowers were kept, which dresses had secret hooks, which footsteps betrayed a scene change. Dr. Vere, by profession, could name the scent in the air without being told. Yet the method was not merely practical. It was tasteful in its way, a constrained flourish, cruelty in good clothes. The message cards, the staged serenity at the desk, the neatness. A person inclined to present life as a sequence of scenes, to smooth the raw edges of motive with quotation marks. He considered Adrian Blackwood without sentiment. A diffident man suddenly given resources must choose whether to become himself or an improved copy of somebody else's expectations. Blackwood had chosen to perform responsibility, and the performance had tired him. His repeated talk of accounts, Who had taught him that vocabulary? A solicitor? A patroness who managed reputations as others managed ledgers? A fiancé trained in the economy of attention? Or a clever understudy who understood the price of waiting? Alleyn took out the new letter and placed it beside the earlier card that Parsons had retrieved from beneath the boutonniere vase. The violet ink on each showed the same hesitation before a downstroke, the same carefully made loop that tried too hard for elegance. Not a hand accustomed to penmanship then, but one who had practiced, perhaps in mirrors. He made a mental note to observe sign-in signatures on the call sheet presently pinned by the stage door, and to request samples from Grimsby's office correspondence. He rose and walked to the window. The alley behind the theatre lay in its usual grey, a strip of city that held secrets by habit. At 4:30 yesterday, an unknown man had stood there and spoken to Blackwood. A professional's balance, Parsons had said. A man who knew where floorboards creaked. All the company knew that, of course, but the phrasing had suggested carefulness not only of sound, but of exposure. Someone used to going unseen, a dresser, a prompter, a doctor, when privacy must be preserved, or an officer, trained to move quietly when noise would cost him. A faint cough brought Dr. Pembroke to the doorway. "Lewisham has taken the samples," he said. "You'll have the confirmation you expect." "Thank you," Alleyn replied. "And you, Doctor, what do you make of a letter meant to redirect grief into acquiescence?" "A poor anodyne," Dr. Pembroke said, "and it smacks of direction, of a hand fussing at the tableau." When he had gone, Alleyn sat again and allowed his mind to settle. He saw not evidence, but gestures. The rejected roses, then their reclamation, the carefully timed delivery of flowers and cards, the small, deliberate vanishing of an ordinary bottle, the message brought by a boy in a hand, not its own. A temperament, then, tidy, imitative, theatrical, disdainful of mess, but not of cruelty, sympathetic to form, indifferent to cost. He would not yet share this shape with anyone. Dust must settle before footprints show. Alleyn proposed tea in the green, room at 5, when the theatre's circuits naturally pause between the mechanics of afternoon and the tremor of evening. He asked for a small civil gathering: Mrs. Harrow, Mr. Grimsby, Dr. Vere, Diana Carstairs, Mrs. Whitmore, Parsons, and, if she could be found, Miss Violet Ashford. The summons was framed as courtesy to the investigation, not compulsion. It was important that everyone arrive under their own sense of duty. The room had been restored to order. The vases had been replenished, pink carnations this time by Alleyn's request, and the battered furniture placed with that unostentatious exactitude of good stage management. On a side table lay a neat stack of cream cards with the theatre crest. Beside them, in a small silver tray, 2 fountain pens waited, one charged with sober blue-black, the other with a discreetly fashionable violet. Alleyn seemed not to notice them at all. They came in by 2s and 3s, their manners in place like good-evening coats. Mrs. Harrow carried her composure as a hostess carries a tray, steady, faultless. Dr. Vere, grave and courteous, acknowledged Alleyn with the contained relief of a man who prefers frankness to anxiety. Parsons hovered at the threshold, correct as a churchwarden. Grimsby's smile, as ever, trembled between deference and calculation. Diana, in a quiet suit the color of dove's feathers, took a seat with a refinement that could be mistaken for frailty. Mrs. Whitmore arrived briskly. Miss Ashford a few minutes late, pale and contrite. "Thank you for indulging me," Alleyn said. "I should like to send the coroner a brief note confirming where everyone stood and at what hour when Mr. Blackwood was last expected." He indicated the cards almost apologetically. "A sentence, merely. A help to memory." There was a rustle of movement. Mrs. Harrow, without hesitation, chose the blue-black and wrote in her firm hand. Dr. Vere did the same, his script clipped and medical. Parsons, tongue discreetly poised against his back teeth, shaped each letter with pious care. Grimsby, reaching automatically, took up the violet, seemed about to exchange it, then shrugged with a private decision and wrote quickly. Mrs. Whitmore eyed the violet as one might a feathered hat for a funeral, and took the sober pen with a small sniff. Diana paused longest, as if measuring the courtesy owed, and finally accepted the blue-black. Miss Ashford, catching the violet before it rolled, used it in a hurried, pretty scrawl. No one looked at anyone else. That was the point. Now, Alleyn continued, a small demonstration, if you please. Mrs. Whitmore, would you be so good as to show me how you would prepare a gentleman's boutonniere from those carnations? And Parsons, where do you keep such a bloom ready for callers? Habit answered where pride might hesitate. Mrs. Whitmore's hands moved with deft economy. Wire, tape, a glass pick, water from the pantry jug. Parsons, prompted by his own training, described the stage door vase, the afternoon replenishment, the way gentlemen like to select for themselves. Grimsby interjected with managerial knowledge of deliveries and suppliers. He knew the price of wire and the hour of the florist's boy. Diana watched the little ritual with a peculiar attentiveness, as if the sight of tidy ends and binding tape offered a consolation not found in words. Alleyn listened and did not interrupt. At a pause, he produced, not from his pocket, but from the mantel, a small brown bottle with a clean white label neatly printed, "Bitter Almond Essence." Dr. Vere, catching his eye, almost smiled. "I am told," Alleyn said mildly, "that scent travels in buildings as gossip does on stairs. One can mistake the source if one is careless." He set the bottle aside. No one reached for it. But Miss Ashford's gaze, swift and then away, flickered to the pantry door. Grimsby swallowed. Mrs. Whitmore squared the shoulders of her conscience. "And letters," Alleyn went on, as if reciting a stage direction, "travel with equal mischief. Notes left where they must be found, and others posted never to arrive. Miss Carstairs, I shall ask you, at your convenience, to bring me any letters from Mr. Blackwood that you have retained, particularly the one you wrote him 2 days before." His courtesy made the request almost tender. Diana's chin lifted a fraction. "You shall have what is yours to have, Inspector." The faintest colour came and went. Adrian had a fondness for theatrical language. It is possible, you know, to overread a flourish. "Quite," said Alleyn. He allowed silence to restore the balance. Cups were touched and put aside. Mrs. Harrow, sensing the temperature, spoke of the company's welfare with practical gentleness. Dr. Vere murmured something to Parsons about fresh air and the stage door. When they rose to go, Alleyn asked Grimsby, very quietly, to remain a moment, then, at the last, called Diana back for a word apart. He stood with his back to the fire, grave and almost abstracted. "There is a way, Miss Carstairs," he said, "to bring this ugliness to its final scene without further injury. Tomorrow morning here, we shall rehearse the afternoon as it was. No embellishments, no bravura. Routine can be a most eloquent witness." Diana looked at him with sudden weariness that had nothing to do with tears. "If it must be so, Inspector, then let it be done without cruelty." "It shall," Alleyn said. "That is the point." They gathered in the green room at Alleyn's quiet request. Mrs. Harrow, Dr. Vere, Diana, Mrs. Whitmore, Parsons, and Mr. Percival Grimsby, whose neat hands worried a silver pencil against his palm. The autumn light had thinned to a cool wash across the velvet chairs. Outside, a rehearsal orchestra tested chords that never quite resolved. Alleyn stood by the mantel, his manner almost diffident. "I should like to put certain matters in order," he said, as if proposing a rearrangement of furniture. "Mr. Blackwood's death had about it the delicacy of a stage device. It depended upon routine. A gentleman chooses a flower. A dresser prepares a water-pick. A doorkeeper keeps a vase supplied. No quarrel, no scene, merely a gesture, fatal because it was familiar. He turned a boutonniere pick between his fingers. The vessel was charged with cyanide solution, a small quantity, sufficient if handled and later brought to the lips in thought or fatigue. The scent we noted, almonds, was not fragrance but warning. Someone had relabeled a bottle and, later, removed it. Mrs. Whitmore's hands tightened upon each other. "Inspector, my pantry." "Your arrangements were impeccable," Alleyn said gently. "The interference was external. The label's glue matches the adhesive used in the administrative office, not your stock. And the handwriting on the notes, violet ink on cream, recurs in one other place." He glanced at Grimsby's desk, where a leather blotter and a pen case had been set aside earlier. "Your blotter carries the same ink, Mr. Grimsby. Your production memoranda do too." Mr. Blackwood had a faint smudge of it on his left cuff. Grimsby's neat smile did not reach his eyes. Violet ink is hardly a rarity in a theatre. "No, but the card left beneath the boutonniere vase was cut from the same stationer's stock as your subscription cards. Identical decal, identical watermark. Parsons saw a gentleman leave by the stage door who avoided the creaking boards known only to the house. That knowledge falls to very few. You are one." Parsons, troubled and loyal, inclined his head. "Aye, sir." Alleyn's tone remained courteous. "The ledger in the stage manager's office lay open at entries that concern you, Mr. Grimsby. Advances paid twice. Petty cash reconciled to figures altered in a hand that is not the stage manager's." Mr. Blackwood, newly conscientious, had begun to compare promises of patronage with actual disbursements. His phrase, "settling old accounts," was literal. Mrs. Harrow's breath caught, a small, wounded sound. Grimsby did not look at her. Threats were posted in the same violet hand to suggest melodrama and despair. Alleyn continued. "One addressed to Dr. Vere, to trouble a man whose good sense might otherwise prevail. One meant to read as Mr. Blackwood's own farewell. Yet the phrasing, 'final curtain, debts paid,' belongs less to a lover than to a manager. You wished us to believe in a theatrically minded suicide and in the nervous indisposition of an understudy conveniently absent." Violet Ashford's name went unspoken. Diana's gaze drifted to the floor. "I think," Alleyn said, "you meant to frighten Mr. Blackwood into silence, Mr. Grimsby. You prepared the pick, intending menace that could be withdrawn, or you told yourself so. But poison is not a negotiator. He died too quickly for arrangement." Silence, then the faint rustle of Diana's skirt. She spoke without heat. "He would have forgiven a debt, Mr. Grimsby. He was foolish in some things, but not cruel." Grimsby answered in a voice that had lost its professional brightness. "He meant to remake us, Miss Carstairs. To account for every sixpence, to bind us to an exactness that would have closed our doors by spring. I kept the company alive. I borrowed from tomorrow to pay for today, and then tomorrow came an evening dress with a ring." Mrs. Harrow bowed her head. "You might have told me, and watched you remove me," he said simply. "I served this house. I could not be parted from it." Allen's expression held tired kindness. "Service is sometimes a form of love that turns blind. We shall go now, Mr. Grimsby, and speak with the least noise possible. There is no need for more theatre." Grimsby looked toward the door that led to the wings, where the rehearsal had found, at last, a stable chord. "I would prefer," he said very quietly, "to leave by the stage." "As you wish," Alleyn replied. No one moved to stop them. The truth had arrived, not as a blow, but as a settling of dust in an empty house. The green room, so lately a chamber for congratulations, received the customary officials with a decorum that seemed almost complicit. The business-like click of the handcuffs sounded undramatic, no more than the shutting of a small drawer. Dr. Marcus Vere submitted without protest, his composure unaltered, his medical bag closed and neatly buckled at his feet. "You shall have opportunity to write," Alleyn said, as the doctor murmured a request for a note to his housekeeper. At the station, Doctor. We will avoid any unnecessary attention." "Thank you," Dr. Veer replied, and his glance, moving to Diana, held the gravity of a farewell offered in a language only two people understood. "I'm not asking you to forgive me." "I have nothing to forgive," Diana said, very low, "but I shall have a great deal to remember." Mrs. Harrow, who had never permitted herself the luxury of collapse, took a single breath and rose to her feet. "Mr. Grimsby," she said to the hovering manager, "you will inform the company there will be a rehearsal at 4 as scheduled. We shall keep the house closed tonight and make a statement tomorrow, brief and without embroidery. The Meridian is not in the business of tragedy." Grimsby bobbed and disappeared with the efficient insignificance that was his art. Parsons, immaculate as always, brought Dr. Veer's overcoat and hat, presenting them with a quiet reverence that reduced the indignity of the moment to its barest terms. "The side entrance, sir," he murmured to Alleyn. "The alley is clear. Fewer eyes?" Alleyn inclined his head. "We shall go that way." He had already telephoned the yard. The division would take custody, without ceremony. There had been enough theatre. Miss Violet Ashford appeared in the doorway, a little paler than was flattering, clutching her script in a white-knuckled hand. "If Miss Carstairs would prefer—" she began with breathless propriety. "No," Diana said, turning with a steadiness that contained its own drama. "Thank you, Violet. You will rehearse as usual. I shall play when I'm required." The understudy's dutiful bow could not disguise the darting speculations behind her eyes. Mrs. Harrow's expression, cool and exact, persuaded her to withdraw. "Inspector," Dr. Veer said, as they moved toward the passage, "you will find the pharmacy records in perfect order. I destroyed the small bottle from Mrs. Whitmore's pantry last night. My own supplies you will, of course, examine." "We shall," Alleyn answered, gently. In the narrow service corridor, the smell of dust and oil was surprisingly consoling. Ivy stood aside with her basket clutched to her apron, eyes brimming yet dry. She bobbed to Dr. Veer and then to Diana, as if courtesy might buffer them all from consequence. Mrs. Whitmore, appearing like a figure summoned by cue, reached for Diana's hand and, without speech, adjusted a skewed button on her sleeve. Outside, the October air had sharpened. A plain car waited with its engine ticking discreetly. Dr. Veer paused before entering. "I've left Diana's accounts in order," he said to Alleyn, not looking back at the green room. "What can be mended, I have mended." "Some things," Alleyn replied, "do not mend. They alter." The door closed with a soft finality. The car moved off. No crowd had gathered. No headlines were minted in the alley. Within, the theatre altered itself by habit. A broom moved, a chair returned to its mark. A bell tapped twice from the stage as if to reassert the ordinary dominion of time. Mrs. Harrow rejoined Alleyn with the brave tidiness of a woman setting a table after a death. "We shall say that Mr. Blackwood died suddenly and that the company asks for privacy. Let the newspapers make what they will of silence." "Silence," Alleyn said, "can be eloquent." She studied him. "And Diana?" "She will go on," he answered. "Perhaps not tonight, but she will go on." He remained a moment after the ladies had withdrawn, wandering the wings like a man listening for a sound only he could hear. The boutonniere vase was gone from Parsons' shelf. The little cracked water-pick lay sealed in an envelope on his own table. The cue light glowed a patient red at the prompt corner. Someone laughed faintly on stage and fell silent. The house ran with its familiar, forgiving hush. Justice, such as it would be, had begun its slow, private business elsewhere. Here, the ordered ritual of entrances and exits reclaimed the building. Alleyn stood at the edge of the darkened stage and looked out into the empty seats, where expectation hovered like breath in cold air, and felt the question that follows every curtain line up for its answer. By the next morning, the fuss had drawn inward, not outward. Dr. Vere, having spent a night in the cells, appeared before the magistrate with the composed weariness of a man who has rehearsed his lines and finds them adequate. He was remanded without drama. There were no gestures, no appeal to sentiment, only a quiet courtesy to the court and a brief, almost formal inclination to Alleyn, which acknowledged a conclusion both had foreseen. The meridian resumed its routine with the obstinacy native to institutions that survive by repeating acts until they become ritual. Mrs. Harrow, who understood the alchemy by which grief becomes program notes, arranged for a subdued matinee. Slim black borders appeared on the bill. A portion of the receipts was to go to a hospital fund. In the wardrobe room, Mrs. Whitmore polished clasps and pressed silks with that chastened diligence which follows calamity. Ivy, whose fright had made her clumsy, moved with exaggerated care, as if the building might bruise. Miss Ashford returned pale and contrite. She had not fled so much as paused, suspended between fear and the old appetite for opportunity. Her apology to Alleyn was tidy, without embroidery. The violet ink, the disappearing bottle, the boy with her note. She could tell him nothing that altered the shape of things. Ambition, chastened, is merely ambition that has learned its cue. Diana came last. She wore ordinary clothes and looked smaller within them, the splendor of the stage held at bay. She asked to see the office and stood for a moment in the doorway, like an understudy measuring a part she does not intend to play. When she spoke, it was with an evenness that suggested hard-won poise. "I shall leave for a time," she said. "Mrs. Harrow is generous. She does not press. It seems indecent to continue as if nothing had happened. And yet, one continues." "Most of us do," Alleyn said. She looked past him to the desk. If Adrian had been kinder to the living, she added, he might have been more just to the dead. It was not bitterness so much as an attempt at balance. She thanked Alleyn with proper warmth and went away without looking back. Parsons, in a small act of domestic policy, had substituted geraniums for the white roses at the stage door. Their unromantic brightness was oddly comforting. He told Alleyn he had done it to spare the young lady's nerves, which might have been true and was certainly kind. Alleyn walked the corridor alone. The pantry smelt of tea and soap. On the shelf, the space where the almond bottle had stood was filled by a harmless jar of cloves. Mrs. Whitmore, practical to the end, had decided scent, if necessary, should come from biscuits. In the green room the furniture had been discreetly rearranged. That too was ritual, the quiet shifting of objects to persuade experience that it has changed. He stood for a while on the dark stage and watched the house lights gleam in their glass bowls. Dust turned lazily in the shaft, cut by an open door. A single white petal lay by a prompt mark, curled upon itself like a comma in an unfinished sentence. He did not touch it. There was nothing particularly triumphant in the result. A confession may be exact without being satisfying. Motive, once put into words, rarely equals the lived pressure that produced it. Dr. Vere had spoken of mercy as if it were a calculation, and of love as if it could be stewarded like a practice. Adrian had sought purity as if it were an estate to be settled. Between them, they had contrived a tragedy tidy enough to fit within polite conversation. Alleyn thought, not unkindly, that the theatre would digest this as it digests all things. It would polish and recount and subdue until the story could be told without distress, and then sell tickets for the telling. People would murmur that Diana had behaved beautifully, that Mrs. Harrow had kept her head, that the doorkeeper had been splendid. Some would remember a scent, others a color. Presently, only the shape would remain. He turned to go. Behind him, the stage waited, a dark square ready to be made credible again by lights and voices. Outside, the day was bright, and a boy ran past with a newspaper pressed to his chest. The headline would be brisk, sufficient. The bridegroom who never came home had, at last, arrived where stories do when they have done their part. Not triumphantly, not ruined, but concluded. And the living, respectful of cues, went on.